Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. When I was 25 years old, I was going through a very scary period of my life. I was separated from my first husband. I had 3 little kids. I was working full-time at my busy dance school. I had 7 employees to support and around 1,500 students. I was paying rent in a townhome I lived in during my separation. I was in a relationship with a functioning alcoholic musician who was abusive to me, and I was very alone and very afraid because I had no one to talk to. People were upset with me because I had left my ex-husband. They didn't understand why I was so unhappy. We had just built a house. He was a nice person. And I was frustrated why me being unhappy wasn't a good enough reason for people to understand I wanted out. I wasn't obeying the rules of my church by getting divorced. And I knew if people became aware of what a mess my life was, they wouldn't like me. So I kept it all to myself. I would fall into bed exhausted at night and I would watch true crime shows. That was my comfort. Back in 1995, they were brand new. The genre was just starting to grow, but the fascination with true crime was gaining traction and I was obsessed. Because here in St. George, Utah, I didn't have access to all the big cable networks, I watched the nightly news to keep up on what was happening in the true crime world, and one night, a story came across my screen that I will never forget. A young woman about 6 years older than I was at the time had been found murdered in one of the most brutal and shocking stories I had heard at that time. And now, almost 30 years later, we finally know who killed her. This is the story of the murder of Mary Catherine Edwards. Who killed Catherine? I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. It's a bitterly cold night in Beaumont, Texas. Back then, there were 112,000 people living in Beaumont, and that really hasn't changed. The city has stayed about the same size. One of its residents was this woman, 31-year-old Mary Catherine Edwards. She went by Catherine. She was a beloved school teacher at Price Elementary School with students who adored her. On the night of January 14th, Catherine's parents, Lum Caswell Edwards and Marianne Edwards, became concerned when they couldn't get their daughter to pick up the phone. This was before most of us had cell phones and we were still using landlines. Catherine was someone with a very regular schedule and her parents knew when she would be home. She was someone who always picked up the phone, and because she wasn't doing that, they were concerned. Catherine lived alone, so there was no roommate. She didn't have a boyfriend, no one else they could contact. So her parents decided to drive to her house to see if everything was okay. They arrived here at Catherine's townhouse on Park Meadow Drive, and they let themselves inside. Catherine's parents walked into the house and called for their daughter. There was no answer. They knew she had to be at home. Her car was in the driveway. The lights were on. They walked to Catherine's bedroom. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe she wasn't feeling well and she'd gone to bed early and she was sleeping really hard. She wasn't in her bed. So then Catherine's parents walked through her bedroom and into her bathroom, and there they found their daughter dead, slumped over her bathtub with her hands handcuffed behind her back, and her mother called 911.
911, what's your emergency?
My daughter's been murdered. She's been murdered!
As the call continues, Mary Catherine's mother, Mary Edwards, tells the dispatcher, "We found her. She's handcuffed and she's been tortured. I think they drowned her." I cannot even imagine what that must have been like. I can't help but picture my own adult daughters, and it breaks my heart. It is absolutely horrific, and my heart bleeds for these 2 parents. Police began heading towards Catherine's townhouse. As they waited, Catherine's parents called Catherine's twin sister, Allison. Catherine was a twin. They told Allison what was going on. Allison picked up the phone and called 911 and told the police to hurry and get to Catherine's house because her parents were telling her that her sister had been tortured and murdered. Allison Edwards Brocado told the police, "I called Catherine's house and my dad answered the phone and he was frantic. He said, 'Call 911 again.' So I called again and I hung up on him not knowing what was going on. I called my brother and he lived around the corner. We were just hysterical and praying. And then my dear friend who lived around the corner came to comfort me." The police arrived at the townhouse and cleared Catherine's parents from the room. There, they witnessed the gruesome scene. Catherine was slumped over the bathtub. The shower curtain had been pulled down and was resting in the tub, as you can see here. Catherine's hands were indeed handcuffed behind her back, but not with any old handcuffs. They were handcuffed with the same brand and model handcuffs that police use. One of the cops later said that as the two detectives looked at the handcuffs and realized they were police issue, they looked at each other and thought, "Oh no, what have we got here?" The handcuffs were Smith & Wesson cuffs that are not generally sold to the public. The CSI team was brought in and spent hours collecting evidence. They did a very good job for a small-town police department of not only collecting, but preserving the evidence, and this would turn out to be crucial many years later. There was something very telling at the crime scene. There was no forced entry, and this led the police to believe that Catherine had opened the door to her attacker and let him inside. The police assumed from evidence at the crime scene that Catherine had been sexually assaulted. Her body was removed from the scene and taken to the coroner for autopsy. Pathologist Dr. Charles Harvey recorded the cause of death as drowning and entrapment asphyxiation, which means lack of oxygen due to choking and drowning. Now, there was an issue at autopsy, and it was that there was not much water in Catherine's lungs. That is why there were two causes of death, possibly drowning, possibly entrapment asphyxiation, which means that the person might have been stepped on or pressed on. Maybe as she laid over the edge of the bathtub, she choked. But there was no question her killer had held Catherine's head under the water. She also had 36 bruises and abrasions that were consistent with a struggle and signs of blunt force trauma. A sexual assault examination was performed and male DNA was found inside Catherine. At the scene, Catherine was wearing only a shirt and she was partially wrapped in a towel. She was naked from the waist down. A neighbor, this man, came forward and said that between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, he heard loud banging noises that sounded like someone kicking the wall. He said there would be several bangs in a row and then they would stop, but start back up again. And then it was silent. A second man, a man named Merrill Cooper, came forward and told police that he and his wife Deborah were awakened several times in the night by loud thumps on the shared wall that divided his house with Catherine's house. They didn't hear screaming or yelling, so they thought someone was just moving things around next door, and they went back to sleep. The police immediately began interviewing everyone in Catherine's life. They first suspected Catherine's ex-boyfriend, a man named David Perry, but after looking into him, he was able to provide an alibi. They talked to ex-boyfriends, they talked to neighbors, they talked to people she worked with. There were several times that they thought we might have a suspect here, but within a couple of months, things were looking very grim. The police were convinced this killer was someone Catherine knew, but they just could not find out who he was. Back in 1995, DNA technology was nowhere close to what it is today, and law enforcement just did not have the options that it has now. The police were invested in solving this murder. They tried. They worked it. But despite all of their best efforts, the case quickly went cold. Catherine's family grieved and tried to move forward the best way they could. The police say the case was never shelved or put away, that someone was always assigned to it, and that their determination to solve the crime never wavered. There was just nothing they could do. They had no more leads. For 2 decades, the case went unsolved. Around 2015, the Cold Case Division inside the Texas Rangers announced that it was looking for cases with DNA on file that might be able to be solved with new technology. I'm sure this had something to do with budget. The department was maybe allocated a certain amount of money, and it wanted to ensure that the money was spent on cases that had a good chance of being solved. Well, they had a full DNA profile of Catherine's killer. They knew that if they could find the person that matched this DNA, they could solve her case. So money was given to reopen Catherine's case and to begin working it from a genetic standpoint. For several years, the police worked on Catherine's case, and they did make some progress. And as they worked on the case, DNA technology improved, and it improved, and it improved. The DNA from Catherine's crime scene was sent to Othram. Now, we've talked about Othram before. This lab is doing cutting-edge work. It is responsible, along with detectives and genealogical researchers, for solving hundreds of cold crimes. I think the number is well over 200, and that number is just going to continue to grow exponentially. The Texas Rangers also announced that it was offering $6,000 as a reward to anyone with information that led to the arrest of Catherine's killer. Now look, I know money is tight. I do, but we're going to have to do a little better than $6,000. This is why I want so badly to raise money for these cold cases. Wouldn't it be amazing? I dream about this at night. Wouldn't it be incredible for us to say, you know what, from our community, here's 10 grand. Add it to the reward. It's my dream. It's my absolute dream. There are a couple of people we need to talk about before we go any further. This is Detective Aaron Llewellyn. He is one of the cops that helped decide it should be Catherine's case that would receive funding to be worked. And he got in touch with Othram and started learning the painstaking process that is undertaken in genealogical research. Aaron said when he got to the point where his computer screen was full of different windows, he started to feel overwhelmed. He asked his wife for help. Who is his wife? Detective Tina Llewellyn, who works in the auto crimes division. In her off hours and in the evenings, Tina started to help her husband work on Catherine's cold case. Neither Tina nor Aaron were experts in DNA or genealogy, nothing like that. But like many of us are, they were learning as they went. Now, we've talked about this here before too, and you know that in the Dark Hearts community, we are all about DNA research. I know that everyone here is very versed in the conversation around DNA, but things are happening so fast these days, it's sometimes tough to keep up. So what is different about Othram? It used to be that when a DNA profile was created, the lab would be looking for 5 or 6 markers to match one profile to another or a profile to a person. Human beings have 24 genetic markers that can be used to uniquely identify each person on Earth. Each marker produces 2 peaks, 1 peak from each parent. Othram is able to identify and use more markers than previous tests have utilized. The technology has advanced significantly. Othram also has DNA samples from hundreds of thousands of people in its database. And because it has such a large database, it is easier for Othram to identify individuals with similar markers. The more people you have in your database, the more likely you're going to get a hit. I've kind of gone over this before, but the best way to describe it, from what I've heard experts say, is as a tree. You find the tree that the person is most likely living on the branch of. For example, in this case, investigators knew that Catherine's killer had Cajun DNA, and his specific DNA banding pattern is associated with people who come from Louisiana. So think of Louisiana as part of the forest. So now the researchers have located the particular part of the forest that Catherine's killer is from. Then they were able to determine that the people with some matching DNA patterns were not just from Louisiana, but specifically from Kaplan, Louisiana. So now they've narrowed it down to a particular group of trees in that part of the forest, like 3 trees. Then they begin narrowing down options by comparing the killer's DNA to DNA in the databases from that same part of the forest. Now, from what I understand, this is as much process of elimination as it is process of matching. It's as much about the misses as it is the hits, because the misses help to narrow down and eliminate potential people. As the comparisons continue to be made, researchers will begin to see a pattern. They'll say, okay, our perpetrator has matching DNA with this person up here, and he also has matching DNA patterns with this person down here, but he does not have any matching DNA patterns with this person over here, even though this person over here does have matching patterns with this person and this person. So now we can eliminate this entire branch over here, because even though someone on this branch matches this person and this person, our subject, our person, does not match this person. So then they can take off that whole branch of the tree as an option. I love this stuff. I think this is just so amazing. So then they take this person up here and this person down here who are definitely related, and they start matching the people who are clustered around this person and this person. And that will lead them down another path, or they will hit a brick wall, and that helps as well. The other path will be a segue to another branch of the tree. As this process continues with hard work and of course luck, because all of this depends on who has and who has not loaded their DNA into a database. There's a lot of luck involved. The researchers will hopefully find the right tree in the forest. Then they will find the right group of branches on that tree, and eventually they will narrow it down to one branch. As the process continues, the researchers will begin to see a more clear pattern where they can say, okay, we've got this group of people on this branch of the tree that have 4 matching markers with our perpetrator over here. Then we've got another branch of the tree with a few people that have 5 matching markers with our perpetrator. And they keep narrowing it down over and over until they come to the close relatives of the perpetrator, of the person they're trying to find a match to. In Catherine's case, one name kept coming up over and over, the last name of Lapointe. Lapointe is obviously French Cajun, so the investigators continued looking into the Lapointe family, and they realized that a woman named Shara Lapointe had been loading all of her family DNA kits into GED match. Now, I've heard that pronounced GED match, and I've also heard it pronounced GED match. I don't know which is correct. Now, really quickly, I want to remind you of something we talked about in the episode called The Mormon Bookstore Murder. We went over this system. We went over all this information about how the different DNA databases work. 23andMe and Ancestry.com are private databases. Police do not have access to those databases. They can get names from those databases, but they cannot legally access any DNA profiles from private databases like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. However, GED Match or GED Match is a public DNA database, and police do not need a warrant to access DNA in that particular database. So if you really want to help the police or other genealogists, you need to load your profile into GED Match or GED Match. Shara Lapointe was contacted by the police working Catherine's case, and she tells them that she is actually a professional genealogist, and she has a nickname. They call her the Gene Hunter. I mean, you talk about hitting pay dirt. Shara is a skilled genetic researcher, and now her own family tree was at the center of an investigation, the hunt for a rapist and a killer. And Shara said, I would love to help you. Of course, I'll help you. Even with that metaphorical tree located, there were 7,500 plus people on that particular tree. Investigators knew they had a lot of work ahead of them, so they were happy to have Shara's help. Shara began working the case really diligently, and she also had communication with people at Othram. And then one night, it happened. It was about 10:30 at night. Shara Lapointe was working on Catherine's case, and she was tracking a family line distantly related to her own. She came across a very common Cajun name, that of Thibodeau. She saw that a couple with the last name of Thibodeau lived in Beaumont, Texas, and they had 2 sons, both born in the 1960s. This was the break. This was it. Shara had found a family in Catherine's town with 2 sons, both of Cajun descent, from the right branch of the tree, and both of those boys went to the same high school Catherine had attended, Forest Park High, at the same time Catherine was there. So Shara sends a text to Tina Llewellyn, and she says, this might be something. I think this is a pretty good lead. Shara got up the next morning and her phone had blown up. She had like 50 text messages, and Tina was calling over and over to let her know they had found this family and they'd found the 2 boys. Finally, after almost 30 years, the police were on the verge of solving Catherine's murder. The police have located the two sons of the couple from Beaumont, Texas, with genetic ties to the killer. They now know that one of these sons and murdered Catherine Edwards. But which one? One of the sons is named Michael Foreman and the other is named Clayton Foreman. It must have been the mother. Her maiden name was Thibodeau because the sons' last names are Foreman. Detective Aaron Llewellyn ran the name Clayton Foreman through the system first. And guess what popped up? A prior conviction for sexual assault. Aaron said the hair on the back of his neck stood up and he said to himself, "This is our guy." In 1981, a 19-year-old woman contacted the police and told them that Clayton Foreman bound her hands, tied her up, and raped her. She knew Clayton from Forest Park High School, where Clayton was manager of the football team. What happened to Clayton Foreman for this horrific crime? He was given probation and he paid a fine. I'm going to try and contain my rage. But how many times do we have to see this? How many times? The Snapshot killer, the Cecil Hotel killer, the Toronto killer. I could come up with at least 30 stories of men who were convicted of rape early in their lives and got no time. And then they went on later on to murder women. It is infuriating. What is the message that we're sending here? It's okay. It's just a woman, you guys. It's just a woman. No big deal. You can rape them all you want and you're not going to get any jail time. I am so sick and tired of seeing this over and over in the cases that I research. I would say especially the older cases, but I do see it in current cases as well. Men do something horrible to a woman and they get no time. And then they go on later on to do the same thing and worse. I mean, the only thing that's worse is murder. When is it going to stop? When are we going to start caring about dangerous men who assault women? Not only did Clayton get no time, but back in 1981, they weren't collecting DNA samples, so they didn't have anything on file for him. Aaron Llewellyn continues to look into Clayton, and he finds a shocking connection to Mary Catherine Edwards. Catherine and her twin sister Allison were in middle school when a new girl moved into town, and the new girl's name was Diana Coe. Diana didn't know anyone, and the two sisters, being kind and compassionate, befriended Diana. The three girls became fast friends. They stayed friends all throughout high school, and when Diana fell in love and got engaged, she asked both Catherine and Allison to be bridesmaids in her wedding. Who had Diana fallen in love with? Clayton Foreman. Diana later told reporters that at the time she was madly in love with Clayton. She said he was so kind and he had the most wonderful personality. Diana was so excited for her wedding and she was so happy to have both of her childhood friends included in the wedding party. At Diana's wedding, Allison and Catherine stood by her side on the day of that wedding. Neither of the twins knew Clayton really at all. I believe he was a couple of years older. In fact, Allison would later say that she never saw Clayton after the wedding. Allison and Catherine were not friends with Clayton at all. They might have known who he was, but they were not friends. Right before the wedding, Diana found out that her fiancé had been in trouble with the law in 1981. She was told, "You know he raped the girl, right?" And Diana said, "Rape? Oh, there's no way." She said the wedding invitations had already been mailed out. She was upset and she was confused and she could not believe that her fiancé would do something so terrible. She asked Clayton about it and he was able to explain it away as a girl he'd had sex with who then had regrets and decided to blame him for something he didn't do. Well, Diana thought he must be telling the truth because if he had really someone, he would be in jail. Oh, wouldn't that be nice, Diana? Wouldn't it be nice if that's actually the way that it worked? Diana and Clayton were married for 11 years. During their marriage, they had a son. The marriage started to fall apart when Diana caught Clayton lying about finances and then found out he'd had an affair. And there was something else. Oh, this just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Clayton Foreman had an unhealthy fascination with police officers. Oh, we see this all the time. Killers, serial killers, rapists, men who hate women, they are very often attracted to law enforcement, and Clayton Foreman was. Clayton was so obsessed with cops and cop culture that he purchased a set of handcuffs that only police officers use, the Smith & Wesson cuffs found on Catherine Edwards. Diana said she remembers when Clayton bought the handcuffs because he got them out of the package and went out and hung them over the rearview mirror of his car. And she didn't think anything about it. Diana said when she heard about Catherine's murder, she called Clayton, even though they were divorced by that time, to tell him that Catherine had been murdered. And Diana was crying and she was upset. And she said, you know, Catherine, my friend who was in our wedding, she's been murdered. And Clayton replied, oh, really? And showed no emotion at all. He didn't act surprised. He didn't act sad. And Diana hung up from that call thinking that was odd. Of course, now the cops know they have to find Clayton Foreman, but he was no longer living in Beaumont. So they tracked him to Reynoldsburg, Ohio, where he was working as an Uber driver. Aaron Llewellyn sent a field officer to collect Clayton's trash. This cop watched as Clayton Foreman hauled his trash to the curb, where it becomes public and police can legally go through it. And the cop grabbed these 2 trash bags out of Clayton's garbage can. He then loaded them up and shipped the trash to Texas. Items were taken from the trash and a DNA profile was created from those items, and that DNA profile matched perfectly to the DNA found at Catherine's crime scene. The odds that Clayton Foreman is not Catherine's killer are 461 septillion to 1. There was no arguing it. Clayton was Catherine's killer. On October 29th, 2021, the cops brought Clayton in for questioning.
We know how it got there, as in who put it there, and that's you. But we don't know the story behind how it got there. There's 2 people that know that story. You're one of them, and she's the other, and she can't talk.
Clayton Foreman denied he killed Catherine. He couldn't answer the questions and had no explanation for why his DNA would be at the crime scene. And when the interview was over, he stood up, believing he was going home. Instead, he was arrested and taken into custody. The trial began a few months ago on March 12th, 2024. The prosecutor put on 30 witnesses and presented 4 crucial pieces of DNA collected from the crime scene. People testified as to what a wonderful person Catherine was. Her former students testified as to how much they loved her and what an impact she'd made on their lives. The 911 call from Catherine's mother to dispatch was played, and the courtroom fell silent. Some of the jurors cried. The prosecutor put the pathologist from the case on the stand via Zoom. He is now very elderly and is in failing health. He testified that Catherine's body was found lifeless, naked from the waist down, hands handcuffed behind her back, with her body slumped over the bathtub wall. He said her head was in the water and her legs were on the floor. The jury was shown the shirt Catherine was found in. They were shown the towel that was thrown over her, and then they were shown the handcuffs, the same handcuffs that had been used to arrest Clayton. It took the jury 50 minutes to find Clayton Foreman guilty of capital murder. The judge then sentenced him to life in prison. He now sits in the Beto unit in Tennessee Colony east of Waco. I'm angry that he had so many years of freedom, but from the looks of him, life has not been good to Clay, as he's known. He looks about 80, not 61. The death penalty was never on the table in this case, and the life sentence does come with the possibility of parole. In 30 years, Clayton would be 93 by that time. I don't think he's going to make it. I want to send love from the Dark Hearts community to Catherine's friends and family, and to all of the investigators who worked so hard to bring justice for her. We all appreciate everything you did. And as for Clayton, let's hope he lives as long as possible, because he deserves every single hour of every single day in prison that he has coming to him. Thank you for joining me on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. It helps a lot, and I'm kind of on my last push to stay here on YouTube. I've got 2 podcasts. This one is called Dining with Death. It's the audio taken from video episodes posted here on YouTube years ago. It's an archival series. I don't make new episodes of this podcast, but this is the current podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee, and I post new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. Both podcasts are on Apple, Spotify, website and Amazon. I want to give a special thank you to my patrons. I appreciate all of you who donate a few dollars a month to help me keep the episodes coming. And if you've got a few extra bucks, would you consider joining our fundraiser? There's a little short video on my channel just called Fundraiser, and it will tell you everything our community is doing to raise money for this exact cause, to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that's never been tested. We are trying to help solve some cold crimes. I hope you're getting ready for the holiday season. I know things are rough out there, I do, and I hope that my channel and the stories I tell you are a little bit of a distraction and a bright light in your day. You are definitely a bright light in mine. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.